My name is John Petticrew. I was the former interim CEO of Ferguson's prior to the permanent CEO being appointed. I did the job for approximately a year.
And your experience, John?
So I started in Catsmurn Dockyard in Scotland, and through the years I went through several stages of management. I ended up being the technical director in the Middle East for a company, and then I moved to Vancouver in Canada, where I was the vice president of the shipyard. I then progressed to being the managing director of Harland and Wolff in Belfast and part of the team that regenerated that company to start the process which the larger company Navantia now has taken hold of and done a very, very good job of bringing it to the forefront.
Could you tell me how long you were on the board of Ferguson's?
I was on the board for 3 years. The 3 years also included my year with being the interim CEO. So I was a non-executive director for 2 years, and I was an executive director for 1 year, up until March of this year.
Thank you for that, John. Could you tell me what your views are relative to Inchgreen Dock and your connection with Inchgreen Dry Dock?
Well, firstly, I have to declare the fact I have a bit of a personal interest in Inchgreen Dockyard, which in my youth was called Glasgow Dockyard. My father worked there and was a manager in there, and I used to go to work with him every Sunday when he was working overtime and doing some work in the office. So there's a bit of a connection emotionally between me and Inchgreen. But that aside, I cannot see why that either the Scottish Government or the UK Government cannot see this asset as being a viable way to upgrade and utilise for whether it's grey ships, and when I say grey ships I mean naval ships, or go back to commercial. I see other shipyards around, repair yards around Britain, including Harland Wolff and the ones down south, doing particularly well. And I believe before the shipyard closed, or the dry dock closed, they were doing well. It's a big dock, it can take a lot of things, and it's a pity that there's a naval shipyard up the road that could partner with this Inchgreen and use it for refits of older British, UK assets.
Yeah, so it's obviously your emotional attachment to it was following your father, who was a manager there, but your attachment to Ferguson's goes back really when you were a board member, but you always had an affection to Ferguson's. When the last time I spoke to you, I mean, as far as Ferguson's concerned, do you think Ferguson's would assist Ferguson's in the commercial aspects of their business if they linked up with Inchgreen?
Look, it'd have to be looked at for sure. I believe that one of the Calmac ferries is actually sitting alongside, getting prepared to go to a shipyard or a dockyard down south to do their yearly inspection. If the dock was open, not only would it be an asset to Ferguson's, but it would also be an asset to Calmac and Seamal in having a larger dock where they could put their ships into, and we wouldn't have to go south. And that's not a dig at England or whatever. It's just that we have facilities close to us that could do the job.
I mean, Seamal, at this moment in time, Seamal's negotiating with Peel Ports relative to Ardrossan Harbour, but they've never come across to actually put forward any kind of support for Ferguson's, or even purporting it to the Scottish Government to use Inchgreen in any such manner, either building Calmac ferries or maintaining them. What's your position relative to Seamal's position on that?
I've got to beg to your experience, because as you know, I live abroad, I live in Canada, my residence is in Canada, but I cannot see why both the quayside space and the dock space that is available shouldn't be used by Scottish companies. And I'm not looking to try and take, I'm not suggesting we try and take business away from companies similar to Dales, who are doing a very, very good job in dry docking ships across Scotland. But I just feel that the dry dock and the facilities there, they've completely wiped out. They took every shed away, they took the paint shed away, they took the offices away, and they've put a shed in just beside the dry dock. I personally know a very prominent businessman in Greenock that has tried unsuccessfully for about 2 years to basically take over that shed and bring in 400 to 500 jobs to the area. Now, the jobs that he was talking about didn't involve the dry dock, but it's tiny steps. You get somebody in there that's making a profit, that's bringing money into the business, and then you invest that money in other areas. My greatest concern with Inchgreen Dry Dock is the longer we wait, the longer the equipment becomes redundant. As you're aware, they took the cranes out, which, truthfully, the older cranes didn't do a whole hell of a lot compared to the new ones. So that wouldn't be something we couldn't get over. But where do we stand with the actual pump room and the facilities that can open the dock and close the dock gates and also pump out the water? That's what concerns me. The longer we go where we don't have a contract for the actual dock, the facilities may be too costly to upgrade and bring. But I don't think they are. Having been to other dry docks that have been laid up for as long as Inchgreen's dry, so it means the dock is in good shape. It's not letting any water in. So I believe that Inchgreen could and should be utilised either by the Scottish Government or the UK Government for at very least the naval programmes, instead of purchasing a floating dry dock from somebody else or commissioning a floating dry dock. Floating dry docks have their place in the industry, but dry docks similar to Inchgreen and the size of it and the number of ships that it could take at the one time is outstanding.
We know it's an outstanding facility, but unfortunately the governments, whether it's the Scottish Government at this moment in time, don't seem interested in supporting our commissioning of a feasibility study. The current owners, Peel Ports, have not done a feasibility study to see who we can attract to the dry dock as far as marine companies or shipbuilding companies, and we have proposed that we commission a feasibility study independent from the Scottish Government, independent from Peel Ports, and unfortunately we don't seem to be gathering support. Well, would an independent feasibility study relative to the marketplace and the condition of the dry dock, would that be advantageous for the dry dock?
Of course it would. Of course it would. And I think personally, I think the Scottish Government's got so many things on their plate right now. You have to figure out where you fit in the order of things that need to be put. You know, I've got to say the Scottish Government, from my point of view, from Ferguson's, the Minister or the Deputy Minister of the Scottish Government has been very, very supportive. Unfortunately, she, as you know, has decided to step down and she's not going to re-offer. So that worries me, because the individual that was there, she was very, very supportive. And I think if we could get Ferguson's up and running where it should be, and I think that the present management can do that if they hit the right points, it would bolt on to, well, okay, we want to go after this ship, or we want to go after this, or we want to go after that. You would couple it along with Inchgreen and try and do, even if Inchgreen was an independent company, have some kind of partnership between Ferguson's, because as we all know, Ferguson has limited space in their yard, And when they launch one ship, they've only got space for one. Well, you probably could put two, depending on the size. But a partnership between Inchgreen and Ferguson's and Dales, for Dales to be involved. You know what I mean? That, look, to me, I think there's endless possibilities if somebody was to actually look at it and look at the market of what's available.
I mean, we were disappointed when Dales Marine actually put forward a proposal to Peel Ports in 2021 to actually take over the lease of the dry dock. They were putting a few £1 million up front to actually help refurbish some of the facilities, and basically at the same time that Michael Milne, managing director of Dales, was negotiating that deal, Peel Ports was working behind the scenes to try and bring in a decommissioning company which hadn't been set up at the time, called Atlas Decommissioning, and the next thing we know, that Dales was pushed aside and Atlas Decommissioning got the lease for 8 years and never brought one ship. So in that respect, you're quite right what you're saying about Dales Marine. We were disappointed that Dales Marine never got it, and obviously Dales, I think, could play a role in this sort of cooperation between Ferguson's and the Inchgreen. Yeah.
And speaking to various people upriver, they would welcome a maritime cloud, which would include Dales, which would include Ferguson's, which would include Fastlane and Rosyth. And I just think that the possibilities are endless if all those companies were to get together and look at what is the possibilities for Inchgreen. You look at the acreage they have. You look at the dock that they have. You know, it's a prime situation for setting up a group of people, and it doesn't have to be all shipbuilding. You know, some of those, as I said before, the businessman that I'm friendly with or friends with in the Greenock and greater area, he was looking just to set up the shed. So why can't we build another shed for ship repair? But you wouldn't even have to fit. I guess where I'm coming from is there's a lot of small contractors around there that would be willing to partner with Inchgreen and Ferguson's to provide the services that they need. If you look at what's happening in Canada right now, Seaspan have just taken on a very Seaspan is the contractor that is doing the vessels for the Coast Guard for Canada. They're just been awarded the icebreaker contract. But what they've done is they've subcontracted to a smaller company, which I was involved in at first. They built the bulbous bows for the FSS program, which is similar to the NNS program in Scotland, because they had no experience of building bulbous bows. And when you look around, you look up north in Macduff, those types of places, you could have synergy between all these companies of bringing programs forward rather than backwards, of building ships in series rather than in parallel. Now, one of my challenges when I went to Ferguson's was the fact that the first ship and the second ship was built at the same time. I don't think we would be doing that, but it's a crying shame that you've got 7 vessels that has been given to Poland, and I'm not decrying Poland. The shipyard in Poland is a very good shipyard, but they're not British, they're not Scottish, and I think we personally need to adopt maybe a little bit more leaning towards the American way. And I could be chastised or contradicted on this, but I think the Jones Act in America is a good thing. Philadelphia shipyards have built tankers over tankers over tankers because they feel in America that the supply of oil or the supply of anything is under the auspices of being vital to the country. And I think all these ferries and all these vessels that are going up and down Scotland, supplying Scotland with various things, but also supplying exports from Scotland, I think they fall within that category. So that's where I think that we could do this cluster that would involve the smaller yards like Ferguson's, like the Inch Green, Dales, and that's just on the Clyde.
Yeah.
We've got more upriver. Okay, it's on the east coast. Would we have to put them on trailers and bring them down? Yeah, we would. But I think there's a lot of innovative people in Scotland that could make the shipyard work. But I do not think that the present owners have a plan. I think they just want to own land. And I could be completely wrong, and I would love to be contradicted on that. We're putting nice guardrails around the dry dock. We're putting a nice security gate in the front. We're making it look good, but it's not doing anything. It's not employing anybody other than security guards.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Kate Forbes earlier on, and Kate, we put a proposal to her relative to Stuart Ballantyne, who's a naval architect and owns his own business in Australia, and he had a programme to build a new Scottish ferry fleet, and it was going to include Inch Green, Ferguson's Marine, and actually regenerate Govan Dry Docks and use them as building the new Scottish ferry fleet of catamarans. But it seemed to fall in deaf ears, and it seemed that there was a barrier built by CMAL. They just want monohulls and they weren't interested in catamarans. What's your view on that?
Well, in defence of Kate, and Kate was the one I was referring to, who's a big supporter of Ferguson's. In defence of Kate, Kate has a governing body that looks after proposals to her, and CMAL would be the ones that would be directing what and where things would be built. So it's not a case that it fell on deaf ears, I don't think. It fell on the wrong postbox. The postbox that needs to be there is the people that the Scottish Government have given them the contract to decide what and where vessels are built. So in defence of Kate has been very, very supportive of the Lower Clyde. But at present, I would say, until she leaves, I would say Ferguson's would be her main objective right now, to making that being a continuing success and employing 300 to 400 people at a minimum.
Is it a challenge? Because we've seen some contradictions in the newspapers, particularly the Herald, between monohull versus catamarans. Have you got any view on whether a catamaran can stand the rigours of the Scottish coastline and actually any sea conditions? Because there seems to be a difference of opinion relative to that.
Yeah, not being a naval architect, I really technically I can't comment on that, but I do know where I reside there is a large catamaran that goes from Nova Scotia down to Boston, and it does very, very well. But in saying that, it does only operate in spring and the summer. It does not operate in the winter.
Right.
So the challenge there is for not just Mr. Ballantyne, but any design being presented should be looked at and responded to. To me, I make it similar to the VAR, the video assistant referee in football now. They have got to a point where they don't just go and look at the screen and then make a decision. They go and look at the screen and give the reason for the decision. And maybe that's where Mr. Ballantyne needs to go, to get a reason why somebody or some group think that his design is not feasible for the areas that we're talking about. Yeah,
well, it would have regenerated actually commercial shipbuilding on the Clyde in the event that they had went ahead with that plan. But to go back to Ferguson's relative to the future of it, do you see that there is a future for Ferguson's? Do they still need more investment to increase productivity? What is your own view relative to Ferguson's?
Look, I think Ferguson is well placed. as I've said in previous interviews or previous cameras in my face, that I think we're not playing on a level playing surface against some of the competitors especially from Eastern Europe. It's obvious that not just Ferguson's, but the whole Lower Clyde built very, very good vessels. There's vessels the vessel I served my apprenticeship on is still one of the vessels is still floating around with the RFA. Not to say what my age is, but it's a long, long time ago. I believe that we have to do something now. Now, there's talks of potentially a direct award. It would be fantastic if the Scottish government could find a way to make this. And I know people personally, like the new CEO Graham Thompson, the CFO and EO David Dishon are working very, very with the board, and actually the new interim chairman Duncan Ferguson was my CEO in the Middle East. So you have three people there who are very, very capable of building ships and knowing what to build ships. The problem with Ferguson's is that it's been branded a bad place, it's a failure, so on and so forth. And we could sit here for another 6 months and discuss who was at fault. But the bottom line is that they are building a good vessel. They've always built good vessels, and my concern is the young apprentices. We've got to show them that they have a future, or we'll continue to lose them. And Dales are affected by this as well. Previously they maybe would have hired some of our guys from, I say our guys, I'm not there anymore, but from Ferguson's. But they're all going upriver because they can see, a long-term future. It might not be what they want, and Upriver's doing a great job of providing buses down at Port Glasgow and Greenock to take them up there so they don't have to worry about it. But if we look at the number of non-UK people that are being brought in order to fill up these gaps, it's worrying. We have lots of young people who want to get into shipbuilding, and to give an example, I never ever knew in my term a welder going and getting an HNC or an HND, whatever it's called now, in mechanical engineering or whatever. A welder would just be a welder, but we've got a group of young people who really, really want to do something. And Greenock and Port Glasgow, and to a lesser extent Gourock, they need these apprentices. What you need is, I can't remember the number when I joined the training centre, but it was hundreds of people. And they recognised they would have people that would drop out. But also what you got was the electrician that went, well, I don't want to work in a ship anymore. I want to go and form my own company, or I want to go and form my own plumbing company. Those things. And I think when the dry dock closed, I can't remember when my dad left. It was like the early 80s, like 80, I believe, Port Glasgow dry dock closed. I actually was there with the RFA boat, Fort Grange and the Fort Austin, that went into the dry dock there. And I drive up to the dry dock by my father. I came at 4:30, and my father's name was off his wall and was off his parking space. And the government, the UK government at that time, had closed it. They just closed it one day. My dad went to work that day with a job and left that day without a job. And what concerns me is that Ferguson's, and to a lesser extent Inchgreen, are the only ones we have left in the Lower Clyde, other than Dales, that are doing ship repair, that can bring in that type of apprenticeship scheme again and get things going. And I honestly believe the three people there, the interim chair and the past chair, Andrew Miller, were trying very, very hard to get work for Ferguson's. But this black eye that we've got in regards to the two ferries is holding people back. And I can understand why it holds people back. So people have got to take a leap of faith in both Ferguson's and Inchgreen. And I use that term, it was a term that was given to me a long time ago by a person I very, very respected. leap of faith have got to be taken with a proper plan and a proper governance to make sure that plan's been adhered to bring both Ferguson back to the forefront and also open Inchgreen back up again to what both you and I would like to see.
Yeah, well, I understand your point on training and in apprenticeships, because I served my time in Scots myself, and I worked on the resource. It was one of my first ventures into the what do you call it, the naval side of Scots shipyard, and also the submarines. But when you look at the amount of apprentices that's going through now, there's very few, unfortunately. And Ferguson's and Dale's is the last surviving companies to actually provide that kind of mechanical engineering trades. And if you look at Grangemouth now being closed, the central belt for by Glasgow and BA Systems seem to be the only people that's providing apprenticeships. Right across the central belt, we're struggling. They're talking now about bringing 300 Filipinos to the scythe because of no welders. And you're quite correct. You don't need an HNC to be a welder, you know.
I'm an immigrant to Canada, and there's nothing wrong with immigrants coming if they're coming to stay rather than coming just for a job and sending money home. You have to look at any group of people that are brought in. Are they staying, or are they earning the money and then sending it back home? So you're not seeing the social benefits of, you know, if Ferguson went to 500 versus 200 or 300, those 200 people would be buying houses, would be going to Port Glasgow to buy groceries, would be going to Greenock to buy clothes, would be going down to Gourock to have a nice meal. Those are the types of things that are not being looked at, the social impact on the area. You know yourself, if Ferguson's to close, it would be disastrous for the local area, because most of the people, 90% of the people that work there live there.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was a great thing about Inchgreen or Port Glasgow Dry Dock, as it was for me with my father. You know, I'd meet people all around the town in Greenock and Port Glasgow that would know my dad, but they all worked there. You know, it's a bit like when Celtic won the European Cup. I don't know what the distance was. It was either 10 miles or 20 miles. Maybe it was more. Every player lived within 10 to 20 miles of the Celtic Park. That's the type of thing that we're looking to do. You know, if you get the Inchgreen up and running and get people, start off with a shed with a local businessman. Start off with a shed, make some money so that you can invest it back into the dry dock. Take baby steps. Have a plan for the future. I just don't see that plan, and I've never seen it in the press or in, you know, any kind of social media that Peel Ports, and I'm not slagging off Peel Ports, they've always been a very successful company. They do things that are right, but a lot of the time it's based on money all the time. But you've got to look at the social benefits, and I believe the government need to look at the social benefits. Is it better maybe subsidising something to get something started rather than paying them unemployment? And then bringing in, when you get depressed, all the other things come in, you know, the crime, so on and so forth, young folks with nothing to do. I just look at the apprentices that I met at Ferguson's, and they were bright. They were better apprentices than from my year, from the year I came from. They were looking to take ONCs and HNCs, no matter what trade they were. They didn't want to just be a welder. And don't get me wrong, welding is a huge part, obviously, of building a ship or repairing a ship. But they had ambition to do more. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for ambition. You're looking for, you know, all those nice houses that were built where the Glen Yard used to be. I must have met 16, 18 people in Ferguson that all lived there and walked to work. I don't think you're actually proposing, okay, let's open the dry dock and start taking ships in tomorrow. When I was at Harlan and Wolff, they were going through a hard period, but the Belfast dock does really, really well.
Yes.
And I think it's going to do better, because now they have this big brother, Navantia, who's come in and brought in the experience. And I know that's what Ferguson's are looking at. They're looking to get experience into the company, maybe with some kind of partnership or an alliance with somebody else. That's what's needed, and that's what's needed at Inchgreen. But any shipbuilder that walks into Inchgreen and sees that dock sitting there, it begs the question why it's not open.
That's why we're so keen to commission this feasibility study, because we're just not only focused on the dry dock, we're focused on the area, you know, to bring marine engineering or any type of engineering back, because one would benefit the other, I would believe. And unfortunately at this moment in time, we don't have, all we see is the council giving more and more money, taxpayers' money, to Peel Ports, and we don't see any development whatsoever in jobs or work. And if a company is trying to get into Inchgreen and have been stopped from getting into Inchgreen for whatever reason, we would like to know, because that's the criteria that's been set up, and the scope that's been set up by the council relative to Inchgreen Marine Park. They keep on saying there's people interested, but we never see any sort of proposal coming forward or any support from any, particularly if it's a local company that you can identify. It seems to me it's a no-brainer. If it's a local company relative to waiting to get in there and provide 300 or 400 jobs, they'll get our support immediately, even though it might not include the dry dock at this moment in time. But to find out that there's somebody looking for it and then nothing's developed is terrible.
I personally think that's the way you're going to have to progress. You're going to have to progress, as I said, baby steps. Get some people in there generating some revenue and some profit, such that you're not going to the council, you're not going to the Scottish Government for money, and you're investing your own money back in it. And, I've read up about Peel Ports. It's a huge company. And obviously they have a business model that they're pursuing. But to me, putting a nice new electric gate in the front and new handrails round the dry dock, or building a new shed that has nobody in it, what is their plan? Why can't the relevant parties ask them, and that's not you, I'm talking about the Scottish Government, the British Government, ask them, okay, fine, it's your land, you can do with what you want, but can you tell us what your plans are? Can you tell us what your next 5 years, 10 years, or even 1 year, what's your next 1 year plan?
Yes.
Bringing in the Glen Sannox or the Glen Rosa alongside doesn't generate the revenue that is required to run a space that size. You need stuff in the dry dock. Now the original dry dock, the sheds were just sheds to support the dry dock. Looking at that facility, it looks like a marvellous facility to set up a company or various companies. The one I was talking about or alluding to was looking at taking over the whole shed.
Yeah.
So that would be revenue generated every month that could be ploughed back in and demonstrate to the government that it is a going concern without subsidies from the government. Then they could go and ask, as you and I do, you scrimp and scrape, get enough for your deposit for your house, then you can go to the bank and say, okay, look, I've got £5,000 here, could you give me the other £45,000 to buy my house? And they go, okay, we can see you've done it, yes, we will give it to you. And I believe that's what Peel Ports needs to do. And I'm sure on their board there's people far smarter than me, but I just think it's a no-brainer. Generate some cash, generate some revenue, demonstrate to the government, whether it be the UK government or whether it be the Scottish government, demonstrate to them that you're a viable organisation, because any proposal for Inchgreen is going to be blackened by what has happened up the road in Ferguson's in regards to giving the contract for the two ferries. I have to say, and I've said it at the Scottish Parliament, these were not complicated boats. They were different. Yes, they had twin fuel supplies, but they're not a difficult boat. If you plan and you have a proper design and you have a proper method by which you're going to do these ships, they weren't hard ships. And That's the same with Inchgreen. If you have a plan and say, okay, well, for the first 5 years, this is what we're going to do, and we want to reach a revenue of such and such with a return of such and such, and they get to that and demonstrate for a few years what they're doing, I definitely think the government then would be more interested in doing business.
John, can I thank you very much for taking the time out today to speak to us and give us your obviously your experience to help and assist the Dry Dock campaign, the Inchgreen campaign, and if you could talk to your colleague and if he's looking for some assistance, I mean there is a pot of money there. There's no doubt about it. There's a pot of money that's there in the city deal, and if we could prove to the city deal that we've got an advantageous company who would move in there and provide work, I'm sure that we could attract some funding to help that company, right, and put the public pressure on Peel Ports to assist that company and getting in there, right, and we would only be too happy to help and assist. But John, thank you very much and best wishes to you for the future, and no doubt we'll be back in touch with you to let you know if we get any success.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I just wanted to wait to talk about it for a while after leaving Ferguson. I don't think it was appropriate to have this type of conversation right after I left Ferguson's. But look, you know my emotional attachment to the whole area, not just Inchgreen. I was born in Greenock. I'm a Greenockian and I'm proud to be from Greenock. I'm proud to be a Scotsman. And I wish you the best in the future.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.